Aloha my kako and welcome back to another book review. I am Mama Kitty and today we are going to be reviewing The Dilemma of Working Women by Fumio Yamamoto. This is a collection of about 4 or 5 short stories about working women in Japan. I am going to say right now before we get into it that I'm going to review each story sort of individually and then kind of put my thoughts together at the end about the whole thing. This also is probably going to get a little spoilery. I just think that leaving out the details makes it harder for, in this particular case, to review it. So if you're not looking forward to spoilers, definitely skip to the end, maybe. Otherwise, let's get going. The Goodreads synopsis is as follows. Izumi is divorced and unemployed, but is the alternative really so much better? Haruka has recovered from her cancer, and everyone else thinks she should just forget all about it. Kato is invisible to her children and her husband, but at work at the convenience, no one will leave her alone. Mizo can't decide whether to accept her boyfriend's marriage proposal, especially as she's been cheating on him for months. Sumie just needs somewhere to live. The first story is called Naked, and honestly, I didn't really know where it was going. And I thought that I kind of had caught on to it, and then as it kept going, it was like, oh no, I have no idea what's happening here. So let's get into it slowly. So again, the character's name, or the protagonist of this particular short story is called Ryoko Izumi. She is an unemployed woman recovering from a divorce, and she is unemployed because the husband she was married to, she was in the business with him, and so when they got divorced, she was either like, go, we're fired, or quit, or something like that. I kind of hated her at first, honestly. I just thought she was really, really selfish. But by the end, I kind of realized, like, she's not selfish, right? She's very disassociated from the situation that she's in. And of course, like, divorce is hard. Especially I feel like in this particular case where not only did you lose your husband, you also lost your job. Like, what kind of 2-in-1 combo wombo is that? Honestly, I think what really sort of helped me understand her was when she finally started talking about the divorce, right? She kind of explained some of the things that her husband used to say, right? That she was like money greedy, or that kind of stuff, those kinds of things. And so I was feeling very double standardy from the point of view of, like, so she was ambitious, she was helping her husband to make new products, and she was getting those products out there, and she was making the company lots of money. And it's like, if she were a man, that ambition, that drive, that money hunger, money greed would all be really good traits for a male worker. So why is it when a woman does it, it's unattractive and greedy? One of the other things that gets mentioned is that he says, I'm tired of living a lonely life, which kind of gives the idea that, she's working all the time, right? She's working late. She isn't home on time for dinner or to make dinner or any of that stuff. But like, when a man is working late and working all the freaking time and doesn't come home on time for dinner or doesn't make dinner or all of that, then he's a go-getter. He's a leader. He is ahead in his field. So what? I was honestly, I really hope this is sort of the point of this particular story, because I got really sidetracked with this whole double standard situation. I mean, honestly, it's kind of hard to feel like it's not about the gender, like, war. Um, it's just like, I, I'm glad that it was being sort of pointed out, or that it not necessarily pointed out, right? Because, Izumi never says that, like, oh, never points out the double standard, right? That's just something the reader sees. But when you consider the gender climate in Japan, right, especially in the workforces, um, it's not a surprising tale based on because of where it comes from, you know? Okay, so she's unemployed and she's divorced. And then she runs into an old friend at one of the companies she worked for previously, because she worked at a company, she got married, she quit that job and started working for her husband. Divorce, no longer employed with her husband. She meets a guy who's a friend, or for a coworker, I guess, from the previous business, and he's like, "Hey, yo, I might have a job for you if you're interested." And so she spends like the rest of the story thinking about this, right? Like, am I gonna take this job? And I was feeling a little miffed at the end because we don't find out if she does take the job. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad that we didn't, because I feel like it would probably have shifted the tone of the story a bit. I did feel kind of bad for her, though, from the point of view of, like, it took her the whole story to sort of process her divorce, I think. And she she's able to be vulnerable right at the end, right? She's able to cry, to let her feelings out and whatever, but she was also in bed with a toddler who she was helping watch, and that toddler was definitely scarred from that experience. But I think it was necessary for Izumi's growth, and I appreciated this story. The next story is called Planarian, and I wasn't as big of a fan of this particular story. I think part of it was definitely that I just couldn't relate to the character, right? So, this one is about Haruka, and Haruka is has recovered from breast cancer, and that's all fine and dandy. But then she makes cancer or surviving cancer her entire personality, and then she's kind of obsessed with the idea of being a planarian in her next life. And I think part of why it didn't resonate with me is one, I don't know what it's like to have and then recover from cancer. Um, but it was just I was annoyed, I guess, that she seemed ungrateful for the life that she had been given. Granted, everybody's trauma, manifests differently. And while I was definitely hoping that she was going to be like Izumi and sort of get over herself, quote unquote, um, it it just never. I was really hoping that she would realize that having cancer and recovering from cancer was not what made her special, right? That she was probably special and or interesting in other ways, but because I assume because cancer has sort of encompassed her life at that point, she just maybe didn't have any hobbies and didn't have a whole lot of friends who weren't sick and tired of hearing about her cancer experience. I thought that after she met Nagase, right, who was this woman who offered her a job, I thought she would sort of mellow out. But she kind of just didn't. I don't remember what she did specifically to get told off at work, but she gets told off at work and she is not happy about that. But then also her boss sends her a book or several books, excuse me, like a box of books regarding her condition, which I thought was a little weird. Like, why would you do that? And Haruka definitely was not particularly appreciative of that. And then she just kind of stopped going to work. And so Naga says, like, hello, where the fuck, like, where are you? What are you doing? And she's like, oh, I quit. And Naga says, like, no, you, what? Excuse me? And it was just this whole thing. But I think I wasn't the demographic for this particular story, and that's probably why I didn't really like it and or save more of the information for it. Uh like it definitely wasn't bad, right? It's not a bad story. I think I'm just not the demographic for it. The third story in this installment is called Here, Which Is Nowhere. And this one broke my heart a little bit. So this story is about Kato, who is a housewife, and she has just recently got a part-time job to sort of supplement for the sudden lack of income coming from her husband because his job just got reconstructed. She has two children, a son and a daughter, both of whom seem to kind of hate her guts. And at least in the story, all we see is that she worries about them kind of constantly. But like in the defense of her children, right? We don't know how she treated them growing up. We don't know how she treated them up until this point, right? So their like hatred slash anger at her could be totally justifiable. But we just don't know. We don't have the full context in this. So it makes the daughter and the son both look pretty bad because she spends kind of the whole book worrying about them, or excuse me, story worrying about them. And I think overall there was just this really big lack of communication. Like it just completely broke down. No one was able to talk to each other or be vulnerable with each other. And that it was just kind of devastating. And like there's just this certain level of honesty and transparency that needs to be there for people to be able to really understand each other, right? Like it's great that she was worrying about her kids, but she was just a little over the top. Like she actually kind of gave me Mrs. Bennett vibes. So if you're familiar with Pride and Prejudice, right, you kind of understand what I mean. She was just very almost helicopter mom. I do want to remind everybody that this is a Japanese story. And so, obviously the culture is different and stuff like that. But I also found the story almost a little bit funny. Uh, just because, I consume a lot of Japanese media, right? A lot of anime. And I felt like the daughter's situation was one that I have seen many times before. And that at some point she's gonna end up in an apartment somewhere by herself, and that eventually her mother will call her and beg her to come back, and it'll just be a whole thing. Now, this particular trope, right, with the daughter being by herself and that kind of thing, and the parents being like, come back, it's pretty common, right? You see it kind of a lot. Uh, and what was interesting to me about it, though, was that kind of we got to see the mother's point of view, right, of a daughter, quote, rebelling and going to live off by herself or with a friend, or she moved out to live with. I don't remember what her relationship was to the daughter, but she went to go live with this other woman who wasn't going to allow her to stay with her, and like, yeah. So it was really interesting to see the other side of that coin, right? And while of course I felt for our protagonist, right, Kato, I still felt like she definitely was part of the problem, and the problem was the lack of communication, right? The daughter wasn't willing to listen, the son wasn't willing to listen, the mom thought she was listening, but she wasn't really listening, and then she was shoving all of her worried feelings onto her children. The husband was just like wherever the husband was. So it was just this real big cluster of not understanding that just didn't go anywhere. Now, I know that the Goodreads synopsis says that Kato is invisible to her husband, but when I was reading it and based on my notes, I remember them being very sweet and very loving with each other. So I did sort of like that. But I think similarly to Planarian, I don't think this story, I'm not the demographic for the story. But I did like to see this mother's point of view. I did like to see the other side of that coin and how she dealt with her son and the issues with her daughter. And it was definitely a very interesting story. So the next story is The Dilemma of Working Women. And honestly, you guys, this story sent me for a loop. So our main character is Mito, right? And I really dug her in the beginning. I thought she was interesting. I thought she was cool. I liked her with her boyfriend, and then there was an affair, and I hated her, and I couldn't bring myself to like her again after that. And honestly, the loop that I was thrown for was honestly so big that it's kind of difficult to like summarize the story for you, but we're gonna give it a try anyway. Um, so Mito is on a date with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend proposes to her badly, but still. And she likes him enough, and she comments though that this is one of those relationships that they've been together for several years, and that the point of breaking up was probably a couple of years ago, and that now they're just sort of in this perpetual state of just being with each other, if that makes sense. And I thought that was kind of interesting. We find out shortly thereafter that Mito is struggling with the decision to marry her boyfriend because she's sleeping with a coworker. Y'all, the scream I scrumped, I had 0.000 sympathy for her after that. She also sleeps with a random dude that she meets at a singles mixer. And even though her boyfriend sees her with a giant ass hickey on her neck, he still wants to get married, right? He's like, well, we might as well get married. And one of the things that I did find very interesting though that she explains to us is that they don't sleep together, right? That they realized early on that they didn't do anything for each other sexually, right? And that so he goes to like professionals, I guess, and then she's been sleeping with her coworker. Uh but by the end, I was just like, "Ooh, girl, you gotta get out of this relationship because clearly you don't want to be here." I did, however, feel very bad for the boyfriend. Uh, it was probably very astounding for him to just be outright rejected by this woman that he was just like, well, I might as well date, might as well marry you. Um, and I think this story would have been really interesting from his point of view as well. But that's neither here nor there. I think of the five stories, in total, this is probably the one I liked the least. I think part of it is that I related to it the least, and I think Mito needs to be in therapy because goddamn. The next and last story is called A Tomorrow Full of Love. And this, I had a little bit of a hard time with the story. And I think partially it was because our narrator was a man. Honestly, I was quite flabbergasted by this development. And before I realized I was reading about a man, I was super excited because I thought I was reading an uber lesbian story. And then I found out he was a man and I got a little sad, so oh well. The story itself was fine, and I actually kind of liked it a little bit. I did have to sort of sit in silence after I finished because it was just very bizarre. Like the whole story was bizarre, especially in comparison to the other ones. And again, part of that is because we're looking at it from a man's point of view, but just in general, right? Like how the Goodreads synopsis says, right? Sumie is just looking for a place to live, and the whole story was like, so it was very Great Gatsby from the point of view of our narrator was not our protagonist, but he was telling our protagonist's story from his point of view. I guess I should explain a little bit about the story. So it's from the point of view of a man. His name is Maggio, and he left his corporate job and started up his very own izakaya. And if you're not familiar with what an izakaya is, basically it's like a small little restaurant bar sort of situation. So he opens up this bar. He hires a part timer he worked with within his, someone in one of his between jobs, and he just really gets to work. He meets a girl, Sumie, and he finds out that she's basically homeless and sort of takes her in, and kind of inevitably, they start dating and sleeping together. She was quite the character. She was definitely someone that I probably would have steered clear of, but was also too fascinated of her to dislike her. She does what she needs to survive, and that mainly means like hustling regulars at Maggio's bar. So going back to the Great Gatsby feeling, once I realized that that's kind of what was happening, I was able to resituate the story in my head, and that's partially why I ended up starting to sort of like it, and why I couldn't quite dislike Sumie. And while she definitely had a roundabout way of doing what she needed to do, I think if I were in her position, I would have done whatever I needed to do to have a roof over my head too, especially if the alternative was sleeping in the park. So she's in a relationship with Maggio, right? And I kind of got the impression that they were going to kind of be together forever, that they were going to get married and they were going to, whatever. But when she finds out that he has a child, an 11-year-old child, she basically just up and dips, disappears, grabs all her shit, and boom, gone. And like, I don't necessarily know what that says about her, but I guess it would be fair to not necessarily want to involve yourself further with a man who does have an 11-year-old daughter. Though the person she ends up living with at the end of the story is much older than them, and likely has children of his own, but I'm sure that they're probably adults by then, so wouldn't be coming around. And I kind of want to sort of apologize because I feel like for this particular review, or this mini story and the story before that, I was a little bit all over the place. But in my defense, I was feeling a little all over the place while I was reading it, so it is what it is. Overall, I liked the stories, I liked the themes, I liked the topics that were brought up, even if I didn't necessarily like the execution. And considering all that, I definitely am going to give it a real good 4 out of 5 stars. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting when I walked into it, but it was good regardless. The next book we're going to be reviewing is The Perfect Arrangement by Regina Brano. As of the recording of this video, I am in the current process of reading it. I am enjoying it so far, but make sure that you like and subscribe and get that little bell part on so that you are alerted to when that particular review drops. That's it for me today. I just want to say really quick, make sure you catch me on TikTok or Twitch sometime if you'd like to come join our write-ins or our banned books book club. We are currently reading 1984, so if that's something that's interested to you, come by my Twitch anytime, and then you can join the Discord and all of that good content creator things. And if you do none of that, that's also okay. But I will see you all in the next video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.